Welcome to this special episode of CareCast, CareNet's podcast on family, faith, and life, with Roland Warren, CareNet's president and CEO, and Vincent DiCaro, CareNet's chief outreach officer. This episode was recorded live at CareNet's 2025 National Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, where CareNet commemorated its 50th anniversary with more than 1,800 attendees. Let's listen in on what Roland and Vince have for us this week.
Well, welcome to this very special episode of the CareCast podcast. I'm Vince DiCaro. That's Roland Warren, your co-hosts here for CareCast. So you might notice that we're in a slightly different setting this time around. The last episode of CareCast was the first one in which we included video. Yeah. So you saw we were kind of
forced you to see us.
Right, we did, for the first time ever. And the listenership plummeted. No, it's actually going quite well. Yeah. But this time around, we're actually here in Charlotte, North Carolina for our annual national conference. So this is the 2025 CareNet National Conference. We're here in Charlotte, North Carolina at this enormous, wonderful convention center. Yeah. And we are commemorating our 50th anniversary. So CareNet was founded in 1975. And we're here to commemorate that. It's our Year of Jubilee.
Year of Jubilee.
So it's all themed. If you could see, I guess we can't really turn the cameras around, but you would see a great theme that we have here running throughout everything that we're doing to really celebrate 50 years of saving lives and to really look forward to the next 50 years of saving lives in this pro-abundant life ministry, which is a great segue, Roland, into why what you and I are going to talk about here, which is that you just gave your big keynote address to open up our conference. We have about 1,800 people here.
Wow.
Yeah, enormous. I mean, the ballroom in which you gave your speech, I think it's the biggest one we've ever been in.
Yes.
And it was full. I mean, every table in the place was full.
Yeah. People sitting on the floor.
Packed to the gills. There were people on the floors, hanging from the rafters. No, don't tell the fire marshal that. No. But yeah, it was a packed house. Like I said, about 1,800 people. We're here in the exhibit hall, actually. But you gave a really great speech to kind of kick things off and to help people sort of think about what it means to be pro-abundant life and what the next 50 years of our ministry needs to look like. So why don't you kind of talk a little bit about what you talked about today? Yeah,
no, it was just a wonderful opportunity to speak to these folks that are in the trenches every single day. Pregnancy center directors, their staffs, board members doing this amazing God-honoring work. And, it's interesting, which you know well because you're in the office, that I pretty much start working on the speech for next year at the conference that year. I'm thinking, okay, Lord, what do you have next for me in terms of that? And I knew that obviously this was the 50th year. And, it's interesting for us, and we've talked about this quite a bit, internally, that, it's 50 years of ministry. And it's kind of weird to say, like, celebrating, if you will, because it's kind of this bittersweet thing that we're like. For sure. So it's really we're
commemorating.
And really if we're going to celebrate, we're celebrating that God has given us the ability to do this work
and the opportunity
to do it. Right. But we're lamenting the fact that we have to do it around this issue.
Yeah. We want to put ourselves out of business, right? Yeah, we hope that we're not around for another 50 years, right?
Yeah, because exactly. Yeah. So, abortion, certainly in the context that it is in the United States, did not exist forever. And we're hopeful that certainly as we kind of look forward to the next 50 years, so to speak, that it won't be that way. And that pregnancy centers may exist, but they're actually helping someone who's affirmed that they're going to bring their child into the world, but needs help.
We need help.
Which
Absolutely.
is what
that's always going to be
which is what happened before. And so the theme, as you mentioned, the conference is the Year of Jubilee. That is actually in the 25th chapter of the book of Leviticus, and it really just talks about the 50th year and the fact that you're looking back in terms of kind of what God has done, but you're also looking forward. And one of the key themes in that passage, in that chapter rather, is this notion of setting the captives free, like liberty, if you will, is celebrated there. And so we think about that in the context of what we're trying to do with life. We really want to set the captives free, if you will, people who are in the bondage of abortion and any of those kinds of issues, bondage in terms of had abortions in the past and need to be forgiven and set free, which is one of our ministries for women who've had abortions, or reclaiming fatherhood for men who've had abortions. So it really just ties really well to what we're doing. I'm delighted to do that.
Yeah. Actually, I forgot something very important, which is that I think every year at our national conference, you and I make the same joke.
Oh, right.
Which is that we're in the hustle and bustle of the exhibit hall.
Right.
And actually, hopefully our audience can maybe hear a little bit of the of that happening in the background. So there's lots of people kind of walking around learning about different pro-life ministries.
Yeah.
But I think you always make the joke that you usually have both hustle and bustle.
Yeah,
you never have just one or the other.
Yeah, you never see bustle without hustling or hustling without bustling.
I laugh at it every year. That's probably why you continue to make that joke every year.
I just love to make you laugh.
Yeah, I know. And you do.
I live for that.
Yeah.
It is hustling and bustling together. If you ever see someone who's hustling without bustling, you should stop them immediately and tell them
to add in the bustling.
Add in some bustling in order to make it complete. It's the fullness.
In fact, I think most people don't even know what bustling is. It's just.
I'm not sure I do either.
No, I don't think anyone does. Right?
All I know is it goes with hustling.
It goes with hustling. That's it. That's right. It doesn't exist on its own. The other thing too that's of note is that it's extraordinarily cold here in this. You can probably see our breath, maybe, but yeah, I know. So hopefully, maybe some of the hustling and bustling will create enough friction to warm up the room. Yeah.
Well, it's a little quieter than when we normally do it because folks right now are in sessions.
That's right. They're in workshops. Yeah.
For those of you who maybe this is your first time hearing about CareNet's conference, I mean, the big thing here is that we have training, workshops, obviously keynotes, but it's really people getting trained and equipped to do the work. And it's a great time for people to be refreshed. I mean, this is really, really hard work.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people talk about, well, it's life or death, and talk about that in terms of, maybe football or some other things. This is life or death or do or die situation. No, what these folks do everything, and it really is.
It actually is.
This isn't like a joke. I mean, it's actually life or death. I mean, every day when one of our client advocates or someone in a pregnancy center is sitting knee to knee with a client, or one of the guys, someone working with the guys is sitting knee to knee with a client. It really is life or death. And they'll walk out the door and they're going to make a decision that's going to determine certainly the physical life or death of the child growing inside of them, and can in a lot of ways for themselves the spiritual life or death in terms of that.
Yeah.
So So anyway, that's a key thing for us to.
Point out. And it's probably worth noting that CareNet has over 1,250 affiliated pregnancy centers around the country, many of whom are now represented here at this conference. And you actually just shared the data during your keynote speech was that last year over 60,000 unborn lives were saved from abortion through our network of pregnancy centers.
Yes.
And there was over I think it was 300,000 gospel presentations. I don't remember the exact number.
No, I'm sorry, it was 107.
107,000 gospel
107,000. Yes,
that's right.
60,000.
Right.
Yeah.
And so all told, since 2008, we've saved around 1.1 million lives from abortion and had over 2.3 million gospel presentations since 2008 through that network of pregnancy centers. And so, like you said, this conference is a place where those centers come to receive the education and refreshing and training and guidance and network to continue to do that work.
And the other thing I pointed out was the fact that, look, CareNet's ministry's been around since 1975, and certainly on the pregnancy center side, like 1999 is when the name was changed to CareNet.
Yes, that's right.
And we weren't even tracking the numbers the way that we do now. It started in 2008. So there's, almost 20 years or 15, 20 years where no one was even tracking the data. So only God knows how many lives were saved for eternity through folks that are here and predecessors. So it's really been just an amazing move of God to do that. And we certainly can't do it without the prayer and support of donors and other folks who are allied partners. And many of the exhibitors that are here today, I think we got 145 exhibitors here. So it's I wish we could show you the scene. It's just booth after booth after booth of people with all kinds of trainings, materials, and things of that nature to really support the network of pregnancy centers.
Yeah, we'll be able to add, I think, some still shots into the edit so that folks can kind of just get a sense of just how amazing and enormous this room is and all the people that are here. So actually getting back to your keynote address for a moment.
Sure.
So you talked about, I would love for you to just kind of talk about this concept of what our first love is supposed to be as Christians. And in the book of Revelation, there's this passage where it talks about how the church of Ephesus had lost its first love, and what that meant, and why that's an important lesson for us in the pro-life movement.
Yeah, it's really from Revelations chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, and it's the letter in that book to the church at Ephesus, which was a strategically important church. Interestingly, it was halfway between Rome and Jerusalem. So, one of the points I made in my talk was, Rome obviously was a secular city, and Jerusalem is the sacred city. Jerusalem means, city of peace, if you will. And so Ephesus is right in between there. So it's strategically positioned to minister.
Interesting.
Because folks would go from Rome to Jerusalem and back and forth, and Ephesus is right there in the middle. So point I made is that pregnancy centers have a similar dynamic. They have clients that are coming from Rome in a proverbial sense, like they are coming with a worldview, secular worldview that's leading them down the path to abortion, and the pregnancy center, right, is sort of like Ephesus, if you will, opportunity to minister to them, to get them to the city of peace. So it's a really strategic city. Had a lot of ministry success, and was very, very dedicated to fighting various themes that were going on then. I talked about the Nicolaitans, which was a sort of a sect, if you will, that was really focused on trying to compromise the gospel, and had a particular focus on sexual deviance and sexual indulgence, and obviously that would lead to a lot of unplanned pregnancies and out of wedlock pregnancies, and how this church stood against those folks. And so that's wonderful stuff, but then the word says, but there's a thing that God has against them, right? Has against them, and it's that they lost their first love. And so really, one of the things that God had put on my heart was that just to really make sure that we don't lose our first love,
right?
Because you're doing all this ministry work, all this activity, all this stuff, like the Ephesus church was, all this great work, but then they lost their first love. And then I kind of walk through, like, well, what is the first love?
Right.
That
what is this thing that they lost that has caused them to go astray?
Exactly. And so, from my standpoint, as I just thought and prayed about it, really is the call for every Christian is to live out the Great Commandment to fulfill the Great Commission, right? It's this notion of making sure that you keep those two things linked, and there's pressure in the pregnancy center world at times for pregnancy centers to try to be like Planned Parenthood without abortion, or those kinds of things, or to delay the gospel or not focus on the gospel because it's a distraction. I mean, these are, as you know well, Vince, these are perspectives that have been out there to really challenge.
Sure.
And when you do that, basically you're losing your first love, because basically you're saying, well, I'm going to live out the Great Commandment to love my neighbor, so to speak, but I'm not going to fulfill the Great Commission. And Jesus never did that. He always lived out the Great Commandment to fulfill the Great Commission. And I used one of the illustrations I used with was the woman with the issue of blood. And I love that story because abortion is a bloody issue, right? The woman coming to a pregnancy center, she has an issue of blood. The baby in the womb is her flesh and blood. Abortion's bloody. And this woman touches the tassel of his robe, right? And she's healed. So in other words, she got the physical healing, right? In other words, the power of Jesus's great commandment love comes through her, like his neighbor, touch it, and she's healed. But why did he stop? He stopped because
and he asked, who touched my robe?
And he asked, who touched my robe? He didn't have to, because he just gave her physical healing. So that to me would be like, she's moving from Rome, right? And she gets to Ephesus. You give her physical healing, and then you send her back to Rome. But Jesus is like, no. You got to get to Jerusalem.
Let's get her all the way to Jerusalem.
Let's get her all the way to Jerusalem. So he stops to restore her physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially.
Right.
In other words, he connects the Great Commandment to the Great Commission. And so my call...
He makes a disciple.
So my call, really, that I felt God put on my heart was, as we sit here in this moment of Jubilee, and where you look back but look forward, that we need to make sure that we don't lose our first love, that we always are focusing this work in that context. One of the lines was, we're not social workers, we're disciple makers.
Right. And I was sitting out in the crowd when you said that, and I heard a lot of mm-hms and saw a lot of nodding of heads and amens. And
because that's the temptation. We'd be social workers. We'll just do this good physical work, but we'll put the gospel away. And candidly, when that happens, sometimes you put the gospel so far away that you forget that you got it. Right. And you see that in the public square. There's so many hospitals that are named Saint this, Saint that.
Or Holy whatever.
Holy whatever. Christian ministries, all kinds of. But there's no gospel there anymore. In other words, they've lost their first love. Right. So they might be trying to live out the Great Commandment at some some level, and typically, frankly, it's not even the full Great Commandment because they're focused on loving neighbor and maybe loving self, but they're not loving God because you can't focus on just two of the three loves. You got to focus on
loving God is absolutely part of the Great Commandment.
Absolutely part of it, and so we want to make sure that we don't do that. So it's a challenging word, but it's a reminder for our affiliates, and frankly, it's a reminder for us at CareNet, and then tying that all back to the pro-abundant life perspective, which is really based on God's design for family, God's call to discipleship, and then those two things are linked to the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. God's design for family, the role of the family is to live out the Great Commandment in the family first, and then to the broader community. And God's call to discipleship, the role of the church is to live out the Great Commission. You see what I'm saying? So those two things are together, and a pro-abundant life perspective means that it's not just about saving the baby. It's about raising the child, but it's more than that. It's about building a family. It's about building a family. It's a husband and wife family to the best of our ability, right? Really the centrality of the sanctity of marriage and the sanctity of life, and then making sure that family gets connected to the church so they can be disciples who make disciples who live and love like Jesus.
That's right.
And that's the fullness of what we're seeking to do, and that's frankly very unique in terms of what you see in terms of a response to the life issue. But this is a really a holistic, gospel-centered, family-focused perspective to the ministry. And I'll make one other point here too, as you may recall, and this has been a question that's been central to us at CareNet. This central question, which is, if a woman came to you and she's facing an unplanned pregnancy at risk for abortion, and you could change everything except the fact that she was pregnant, what would you want to have happen? So, you can respond to that a little bit, like as you kind of walk through that. What would we want? Right?
Well, I think, the first thing that most pro-life Christians would say would be, well, we want her to keep the baby. We want her to choose life.
Yes.
Right.
And are we done?
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully,
because remember, you can change.
We could change everything. So I guess we would want the father of the child to be involved in some way, shape, or form. Right. At least to pay financially for the child that he helped create, right?
Do we want him to be a baby daddy? We could change everything, right?
So we would want him to actually be dedicated to her and the child, and probably the best way for that to happen in a Christian construct is for him to marry her.
Whoa, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So the father and the mother are united in marriage, and they're raising their child together. And again, I guess if you're posing this question to a pro-life Christian, then certainly we would want them to become Christians.
Yes.
Right? And so that we would want them for them to become Christians, the mother and father, and then to raise their child in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and for that child to have an opportunity to become a Christian, and then for them to sort of come full circle to as you would say, be disciples who make disciples.
Yes.
Right? So they come back to the church and or the pregnancy center to serve and help others who find themselves in the situation that they were in at one point.
That's
so again, if you, like you said, if you could change everything, and I actually think the second way that you pose that question is also extremely helpful for people to think about, which is that what would you want to have happen for that woman in that unplanned pregnancy, and also what do you think God would want you to want for her?
Exactly.
Right? And I think that helps us frame it, because again, our just human nature is to just focus on the here and now, the temporal, and especially in terms of the way we think about issues, right? When we're in our pro-life sort of silo, all we can think about is we want her to choose life.
Yep.
And then we kind of stop there, and it's like, wait, okay, we are pro-life, but we're first and foremost, we are Christians, right?
Yes.
And so what would God want you to want for that woman who you have an opportunity to minister to through her unplanned pregnancy, right? So life, marriage, family, fatherhood, discipleship, the church, those are all the things that we would want.
Exactly. And that's why, again, reminding, we're not social workers, we're disciple makers. Right?
Yep.
So that's key. And I put a fine point on that, which God kind of really helped me see, which was, he was faced with exactly that dilemma with Mary. Right. In Isaiah 7:14, it says that a virgin will conceive and bear a child. Right. And so he locked himself in with his word, and God won't violate his word. So he, generations before, locked himself in. So now he's faced with Mary, who he can change everything except the fact that she's pregnant. And what does he do?
Gives her a family and makes her a disciple maker.
Right. Calls Joseph to be a husband to her, a father to the child growing inside of. In other words, he builds a family who then become disciples who make disciples, right? That's really what happens through the life of Christ. So my view is like, that's what God has called us to do.
Absolutely.
When we have a situation in our humanity where we're facing an unplanned pregnancy, and that's really what the pro-abundant life perspective is. It answers that question, right? Because I often say a pro-life perspective is designed pretty much to lead you to the poles. A pro-abundant life perspective is designed to lead you to the cross. And then you're supposed to take the perspective of the cross to the poles, and that's one of the problems we have. We have Christians that are going to the poles without the perspective of the cross, and we've talked about that a little bit in terms of what we see.
Or sometimes bringing their pole perspective into the church.
Exactly.
Right, and kind of go in the opposite direction.
So then the church starts to compromise and and settle for something less than what you see God doing, which was building a family that becomes disciple makers who live and love like Jesus.
Indeed. Yeah, and so kind of tying this back into why we are here today, right? We're here at this conference to help people understand and then live out that perspective in the work that they're doing at their pregnancy centers, at their churches, which is important. Now, I was going to mention that two things that have changed, I think, pretty significantly. So you've been at CareNet for 13 years, so this is probably your 14th conference. I've been at CareNet for 11 years. This is my 12th conference, and in those years, I think two of the things that we for sure have noticed that have changed over time is there are a lot more men at our conference now, and a lot more folks that are just here from a church, or a ministry, a church-related ministry that's not necessarily a pregnancy center, right? In fact, I met a couple folks on the elevator yesterday. It was, one of those funny things where I hit the wrong button on the elevator, and I ended up having to go all the way up to like the 18th floor or something like that. But it was an opportunity to chat with the folks that were in the elevator with me, and I said, "What pregnancy center are you with?" And they said, "Well, we're actually kind of like we're with our church, and our church is trying to do X, Y, and Z." And I was like, that's amazing. Give me your business card so we can talk about that, because that's the idea, right? We want churches and pregnancy centers doing this work together with the church, obviously, as the seat of discipleship being the lead, right? And so those are two things that here at this national conference, more folks that are just linked to a church that wants to do pro-abundant life ministry, and then more men who are helping bring that full family perspective into the work. And so
you don't get God's design for family without men, and you don't get God's call to discipleship without the church.
Indeed.
So it's been just amazing to see how it's expanded, and obviously, we talked about ICU Mobile, the mobile ministry that we merged into CareNet.
There's like almost a life-size replica of like a truck over there. It's two-dimensional. It's a very flat truck, but it's like right there.
ICU Mobile's exhibit.
It's the mobile medical unit. It's a van. I always call it a truck, but it's not really a truck.
It's a van that has ultrasound and client advocates and medical professionals, so we can take the ministry that happens in the brick and mortar kind of physical space of a pregnancy center into a community. So we're seeing that expansion as well. And we actually brought one of the mobile units
here outside
so people can see it. But more and
maybe
more.
I'll go in there to warm up.
Well, and to your point about the churches, one of our core strategies is really try to get more and more churches to actually put mobile units in service in their community as well. If they can't put a pregnancy center in the church, well, you can put a mobile unit
in the parking lot.
In the parking lot next to your church that can go out into the community. So it's really been amazing to see over the 13 years, to your point, how this ministry is expanded and really including all of this. And it's all part of a pro-abundant life perspective of our destination for any client is that they end up being a disciple of Jesus Christ, connected to a church to live and love like Jesus.
Great, absolutely. So we got a lot more great stuff coming in our conference here. We'll actually be Roland will be interviewing a couple of our keynote speakers for the CareCast podcast, so that's going to be great. But as always, go to care-net.org to learn more about what we're doing here at our conference and this pro-abundant life perspective that we're exploring and teaching and just going into with the folks that run our pregnancy centers, our pregnancy decision line, our ICU mobile ministry, and how we're working on that transformative approach of being a pro-abundant life ministry as CareNet. And that's obviously, for most of our listeners, that's what you make possible. That's what you support. And we obviously want you to kind of see how this all happens in real life. So thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Roland, for another great keynote this year.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And we'll just get involved in the hustling and the bustling now.
We're going to get out there. All right.
And hustle and bustle.
And do both. Yes. All right. Sounds good.
Blessings to you.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of CareCast. For more Pro Abundant Life commentary and practical resources, please visit care-net.org. There you can subscribe to the Abundant Life blog, giving you access to videos, ebooks, podcasts, and other resources to help turn your pro-life passion into pro-abundant life action. Until next time, we pray that God blesses you and yours daily.